America launches largely short-term assaults on imaginary rogue states while desperately trying to keep its own commitment and its own losses to a minimum. It gives its soldiers cultural awareness training to educate them that they are not superior to foreigners, which, while of course being true, surely makes it very difficult for them to wage a war against said foreigners. America is even designing eco-friendly weaponry, weapons which, quote, can kill people but which are not an environmental hazard. And I think that really speaks to a political desire amongst the Washington elite not to make too much of an impact on our fragile and fragmented world. So what we end up with is a vicious cycle. On the one hand, America is drawn to the international sphere in search of some purpose, in search of a cure for its Vietnam syndrome. Yet on the other hand, its lack of purpose means that it is unable to commit to foreign ventures or organize them coherently. So is America still the world's policeman? No, I would argue that currently it's more like the world's bounty hunter, the world's mercenary, traveling the globe in search of a quick moral fix. And that kind of unpredictability and arbitrariness on the part of American power means that America can be even more dangerous today than it was in earlier eras.
When I wrote this book in defense of America, I've taken pains to point out it is a short book. Nonetheless, I've enjoyed sitting through what seems to me a caricature of America, and it's very easy to sit here at this civilized capital and poke jibes at America, but I've been sitting here thinking, you know, what really would we rather have? Would we rather have Russia as the world's most powerful country, China? It's very easy, it seems to me, to take the best of America for granted, to take the victories, the successes, the things it has done for stability and peace, to take them and to take the scientific success, the medicine that we all live off, the prosperity, even despite the past year's turmoil, the prosperity that has helped bring our own prosperity, to take all that for granted and then poke fun or derision at the times when it has seemed to be more confused or acting in its own interest and not in others. What is it that these critics of America really expect? This world superpower acting always in other people's interest, not its own, always deferring to other countries that are less powerful. It's a sort of fantasy of improbability. We wouldn't be having this debate at all if it weren't for Iraq and if it weren't for 8 years of George W. Bush. And in a way, as well as that, if it weren't for the economic turmoil. So America has suffered 2 assaults on its sense of itself, if you like, its sense of what it is doing abroad and its sense of its economic organization. And I think the first is harder for America to address than the second. Even with, say, Barack Obama in the White House, it's going to be harder on the foreign front. Is America the world's policeman? In essence, yes, it is taking that role that is implied by that question. If you look at Afghanistan, the less controversial of George Bush's 2 wars, America is overwhelmingly the military power there. But there are all kinds of diplomatic questions at the moment that can only be decided with American intervention. And it comes down to whether you think it is still a country that represents democratic values, that holds them dear, and that is promoting those. I wouldn't rush to defend either its execution of the Iraq War or some of the trappings of that, like Guantanamo, which I think are an absolute core offense to American values. But it still does, in a lot of its foreign policy, believe that it is going out to promote democracy. And to me, the most telling example of that is in Central and Eastern Europe. If you go around those countries, you run into person after person, ordinary people, not the political elite, passionately supportive of America because of the role that they feel America played in getting them out of the Soviet Union and in giving them a future that is defined by democracy and by a market approach to their economies. And they are very grateful, very keen that their politicians are supportive of America and very willing to say that openly. And I think that is testimony to one of the better things that America has done. I think it is an impressive thing to remember, and particularly sitting in Britain, where we can be very complacent about our own democracy, that our own democracy is not as robust as we sometimes take it to be, and that American democracy is an impressive thing.
I think Bronwyn raised the point, that if it weren't for Bush and the Iraq war, we probably wouldn't be having this discussion. I think this is a very good point because Clinton intervened many times in other countries. We think Somalia, Bosnia, Kosovo, Iraq, and Afghanistan, and yet that was largely
in a funny way, Northern Ireland,
and yet largely these actions were seen as legitimate. So something has changed. As Anatole writes in his book, that there is much less of a difference between sort of Republican and Democrat foreign policy.
If you go outside Europe and look at America's actions, and because within Europe Clinton generally tried to operate by consensus, we see it more positively. But in other parts of the world, you don't see most of the Central Americans praising American policy much under Democrats or Republicans. As to the Middle East, yes, there was support, certainly among governments, for the first Iraq war and one or two other things. But of course, in general, American policy, the whole notion that America has a positive role to play in the Israel-Palestinian conflict, of course it has a role. Its role is to support Israel. That's like saying, Russia could have had a positive role in resolving the Kosovo conflict. Well, yes, from the point of view of the Serbs, certainly. But by the way, I'm not saying at all that America doesn't have a positive role to play in various places, and where Bronwyn said that American diplomacy is critical, in various things. Yes, but that is diplomacy. It's positive diplomacy by a great power. It's not a policeman telling everybody else what to do. Of course America has a role to play, in dealing with the threat from North Korea, but so does China, so does South Korea, so does Japan. It has a role, but not necessarily a dominant role.
I was as opposed to Clinton's interventions as I am to Bush's. And I think just to come back on Anatole here, I think it's important to realise that, Bush is the successor very much to the intervention created by Clinton and Blair. He's not an aberration from it. And it was Clinton and Blair who moralised international affairs. You can really see that over Kosovo, where they spoke explicitly in terms of good and evil, right and wrong, and they said this is not a war for territory or for influence, it's a war just to enforce right against wrong. It was those two leaders who did all the things that Bush is now accused of doing. All Bush has done is he's quite clumsily adopted that kind of morality and added God to it. That's what people don't like about it. So on why Bush seems more illegitimate, it's really because he's lost favour with the liberal elite more than anything else, with liberal commentators, with the very people, we should remember, who created this kind of so-called humanitarian intervention. They don't like him because he's Texan, he's clumsy, he's obtuse, he's not a very nice person. And so, I would argue that the term neoconservatism is largely an invention by liberal commentators who want to distance as much as possible Bush's barbarism from their own. So I think that's the reason Bush seems unpopular. Just to come back on Bronwyn, this idea that America has a positive role to play in Central and Eastern Europe, I just find that extraordinary. That area is exactly what I was talking about when I said that America's intervention today is dangerous precisely because it's so unwieldy and crazy. America now, we have a situation where America is kind of creating satellite states along the border of Russia, sighting missiles there or talking about sighting missiles there. This explicit provocation of Russia, one of the most powerful states in the world. And we can see the profound instability that provoked when there was the Georgian conflict, where you have this state, Georgia, a really immature, juvenile state, kind of backed by America, cajoled by America, provoked by America, then launches a war against Russia. I mean, one of the most extraordinary events of recent years. So I think the idea that America has a positive role to play there is just mad, really.